Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? You know those sayings you use all the time without really thinking about them? Well, today we're going deep on one of those. A dime a dozen.
Yeah, those little phrases we toss around, they can be really fascinating when you stop and think about them.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack the origins of a dime a dozen and the true meaning, and even look at how it gets twisted around sometimes.
It's really important to be precise with our language, don't you think?
Yeah, especially in a world with so much information flying around.
It's true. Understanding idioms like this one helps us avoid misunderstandings and really connect with what we're trying to say.
So let's rewind the clock. Where does a dime a dozen even come from? It feels like it goes way back.
You're right on the money with that. Imagine walking through a busy American market in the 1800s. All the sights and sounds, people bartering for goods.
And could you get like a dozen eggs for a dime?
Exactly. Everyday things like eggs, potatoes, you name it. Even oysters were often sold for a dime a dozen. You see it all over newspaper ads from that time. It's a glimpse into life back then.
So the saying was literally reflecting what was happening in those markets.
Precisely. And everyone understood it because buying in bulk was so common. It reminds us that language often grows out of these practical, everyday experiences.
It's like how we still love those buy one, get one free deals. It's like that second item suddenly seems less valuable because it's paired with the first.
Such a good point. And it all ties back to a basic principle: supply and demand. When you have a lot of something, the value seems to go down, and the price often drops too. But what's interesting is the psychology behind it. We naturally value things that are harder to get, things not everyone can have.
Does the idea of price always have to be connected to the saying, though? Could something be a dime a dozen, even if it's not being sold?
That is a great question. The real meaning of a dime a dozen isn't about something being cheap or bad. It's more about abundance, making something seem less valuable. If something's easy to get, whether it's a product or even an idea, it's just not seen as special.
So it's like we're always chasing after those rare things, the things that set us apart, and we might miss the value of things that are right in front of us.
Exactly. Think about trends, especially with social media nowadays. Something might be super trendy and seem rare, but then all of a sudden it's everywhere, mass-produced, and it quickly becomes, you guessed it, a dime a dozen.
I never thought of it that way. It's like once something is everywhere, it loses its appeal.
It's funny how that happens. It shows how deeply connected we are to the idea of scarcity and value.
But I know people sometimes use a dime a dozen incorrectly, like when they're talking about something that's just bad quality.
Right. It's a common mistake. Imagine someone saying, those smartphones are a dime a dozen these days. They're not saying the phones are bad, just that they're everywhere.
Okay, that makes sense. But I've also heard people say it about things that are rare, like a talented artist like her is a dime a dozen. It just sounds so wrong.
You're right, it does sound off, because it goes against what the idiom means. You wouldn't describe a rare book or a super specialized skill as a dime a dozen.
Yeah, it would be like saying it's easy to find someone who knows rocket science.
Exactly. It seems like people misuse it when they don't understand the difference between abundance and scarcity.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive. It's all about uncovering those little details and understanding how to use this phrase correctly.
Exactly. Exploring how this simple saying has changed over time and using it in a way that truly captures what it means.
So how do we avoid misusing it and use a dime a dozen the right way?
The most important thing is to remember it's not about the quality, it's about abundance. And always give enough context to make your meaning clear. Instead of just saying, those skills are a dime a dozen, you could say, these days, it seems like everyone has those skills. That way, everyone knows what you mean.
It's a small change, but it makes a big difference. You're not putting someone down, just explaining the situation.
Exactly. And another important point is to be careful of the tone. Sometimes a dime a dozen can sound dismissive or even harsh.
I can see that. Like if you told someone your ideas are a dime a dozen.
Right, it could sound like a personal attack, even if you're just saying that similar ideas already exist.
So we need to be aware of the context and understand that words can have different meanings depending on how they're used.
Exactly. And that's why understanding idioms is so important. It's not just about knowing the definition. It's about understanding the nuances and how they affect our communication.
You know, it's funny, we get so caught up in chasing rare things, the next big thing, that we forget to appreciate the everyday stuff.
It's true. We're always hearing about exclusive things, limited editions, what everyone else wants. It's easy to get sucked in.
Yeah, and that's why a dime a dozen can make you think differently. It reminds us to step back from all that and look at what we already have.
I like that. It can be a starting point for a better conversation about value and what we take for granted.
Yeah, like saying, hey, let's not overlook the simple things that make life good.
Exactly. Like clean water. In some parts of the world, it's really precious. But a lot of us just turn on the tap and there it is.
It's so easy to forget how lucky we are to have that, to have things be so easy. And it's not just stuff we buy. Like, what about a sunny day after it's been raining for a while? It feels amazing.
And then if it's super hot out, we complain about the sun. It's all about how you look at it. What's a lot for one person might be rare for someone else.
That's what makes this so interesting. It makes you question what you think is valuable.
Imagine you have a friend who's feeling down about trying to find a job. You could say, it feels like everyone's qualified right now, but don't get discouraged. What makes you unique will make you stand out.
That's a great way to use it. You're being realistic, but also encouraging your friend.
That's what matters. A dime a dozen doesn't have to be negative. It can start a better conversation about what's important and how we see things.
It's like saying, look deeper, see the value in everyday things, the stuff we might miss.
Exactly. It's realizing that just because there's a lot of something doesn't mean it's not valuable. It's our thoughts and opinions that decide that.
So when someone says, that's just a dime a dozen, stop and think about what they really mean. Are they just saying there's a lot of it, or are they missing what makes it special?
And an even better question is, what are some of those dime a dozen things in your life that you could appreciate more?
What makes you happy? The little things, the people you care about.
Like laughing with people you love, being out in nature, even just breathing fresh air.
Things that seem normal but actually are really important for a good life.
And if we see how much they matter, if we change how we see them, we can feel more thankful and happy.
It's like we're learning to see how special the ordinary stuff really is, to find those hidden gems.
Exactly. It's about questioning what we believe about value and realizing that having plenty of something can be a really good thing.
So as we finish up this part of our deep dive, let's try to look at the world in a new way.
Let's appreciate all the great stuff around us, even in the simplest things.
Because what's most valuable is often right there, just waiting for us to see it. Wow, it's amazing how powerful a simple phrase like a dime a dozen can be. It really makes you think.
It really does make you rethink things, doesn't it? What we think is valuable, all that.
And it all goes back to something we talked about before, how important it is to use language in a precise way. Using a dime a dozen the right way can really make our communication better.
It's about thinking before we speak, not just saying things without thinking.
Yeah.
And having real conversations about what matters.
Instead of just saying something is everywhere, we can use the phrase to talk about why we see things the way we do.
Think about your own life. Have you ever used a dime a dozen for something that you realized later was actually really important?
It makes you realize how easily we dismiss things.
And that's what makes this deep dive so important. It's not just about this one phrase. It's about understanding the little things about language and how our words can affect people.
So the next time you want to say a dime a dozen, take a second to think about what you really mean.
Are you just saying there's a lot of something? Or are you saying something that might hurt someone else's feelings?
It's about being thoughtful and understanding that words can mean different things depending on how we use them.
Exactly. And that's what makes exploring these idioms so interesting. We learn about history and culture and how we talk every day.
It's about being more aware of language and using it better.
It's about understanding that words can teach us things, connect us, and even inspire us.
Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into a dime a dozen. We hope you learned something new and interesting today.
Maybe you'll hear this phrase differently now and think about what it really means.
And maybe you'll even use it in a new way, understanding what it truly means.
And hopefully you'll look at those everyday things, those simple joys, in a new light.
Thank you for joining us. Keep listening and stay curious. And remember, the best things in life are often right in front of us, just waiting to be appreciated.